Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So I don't think I've ever done a video about the gacha revenue chart on my channel. I think I might have mentioned it once or twice on my live streams, but I never really delved too deep into it and made an actual video about this thing because, to be frank, I was never compelled to. It was always seeming to be like a PvP gacha community circle jerk type of deal where people like compare their games to each other. So I never really got too into it. It always seemed to me like Honkai Star and Genshin Impact were at number one or number two anyways, and they're both from the same company, so it's not really truly PvP, it's just some gacha community bullshit. Maybe sometimes they're like a Nikkei or a Fate Grand Order of Uma Musume in number one, number two, or number three. Whenever they have their most hype banner for the year, then they get to number one or number two and dethrone Honkai Star and Genshin Impact for a time. But otherwise, they just go back down super fast. Uma Musume went from number one in March to number four in April, and then just keeps going down to number five, and then it goes down to yeah, it just hovers on number four or five, and then Honkai Star and Genshin go back to number one or two. So it always seemed very consistent what was happening and very boring. Now I'm covering August 2024, the gacha revenue chart for this month, because frankly, this is definitely the most interesting and probably the most unique gacha revenue chart that has released since, well, gacha revenue charts were a thing. And I think even if you included all the revenue from before gacha revenue charts were a thing to include like the first 2 years when they weren't, after Genshin released, I think they would still be pretty boring because Genshin Impact will just be at the top all the time. So what is different about August 2024? Well, if you look at the top rankings for all the games, it's very clear. Let's just go to individual regions for now. It's very clear that this one is different because, well, let's be honest, HoYoverse games are not at the very top. In fact, they're not even the top five. They're not even the top six or top seven. They're actually only in the top eight of the rankings for individual regions on the gacha chart. Only when you go down from number 8 to number 9, 10, 11, 12, do you see all the HoYoverse games. The number one most, well, like, what would you even call it? The highest earning game of gacha games in the month of August is actually AFK Journey in China with 46.8 million. It just released there. 11D Space, always very popular in China because of the Otome community. 35.8 million in July to 38.5 million in August, doing very well. Fate Grand Order in Japan going from 9 million to 27 million. No idea what's going on there. I don't play Fate Grand Order. I tried to multiple times. It actually crashes on my phone all the time and I just gave up. AFK Journey released in Japan. So this global revenue for Japan is really just for Japan. It went from 5 million to 25 million. That's really, the increase is almost entirely from Japan, let's be honest. Monster Strike in Japan going from 23 to 23, exactly the same. Naruto Mobile in China, 24.8 million to 22 million. I actually tried to play this game on my phone, but I couldn't find the download because it's actually only a China-only game. I don't know why they do that. Naruto is extremely popular everywhere else, so I don't know why they don't release it in global. It seems to be like this game is not even in Japan, I don't think, which is insane. Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle is entirely carried by its IP. It's doing extremely well, 24 million to 21 million. I don't really care. I tried the game. It's not really that much of a game. And then only in number 8 do you find Honkai Star and Global, which is insane because Honkai Star being number 8 is just insane by itself. But the fact that it's actually global making more money than China is also pretty fucking insane. Going from 22 million to 20 million, and then everything below that, China, Honkai Star 19.3 to 19.3, China, Genshin 19.3 to 19.3, still the same. Global Genshin 18 to 19 million, a small rise there. And then Zenless Zone Zero in China going down drastically from 68.8 million to 16.5 million, a drop of 80%. Now, I will talk about this more later on, but I think my initial impressions is definitely that a drop of 80% in China is definitely not not the numbers that HoYoverse is looking for. I think that even considering all of the different excuses and reasons that you can give for why it's dropped so much, it is still not a good number, and they will probably be doing more to fix this later on. I'll talk more about this later on, but essentially that's my initial thoughts. And then going down 3 more spaces, 3 more rankings. Global Zenless Zone Zero went down a bit less in terms of percentage. It went down a bit more than 50% from 31 million to 15 million. And this is very interesting because global, this is something that you will notice. Global gacha game revenue seems to be dropping lower than China, and I will be talking more about why this is later on. And then you have to go down all the way down to find Wuthering Waves and Global earning more than China again. Like I said, Wuthering Waves only went down from 13 million to 8 million. And then you find even a couple more rankings further down. In China, Wuthering Waves went down a whopping 16.5 million to 5.5 million. So its revenue got by 2/3. It's only now making 5.5 million in its home country, which is insane. And there's a very good reason for this. But first of all, let's go over all the different other like basic excuses and reasons why these gacha games are not earning whatever amount that you think they should be earning. So let's go to combined regions. So even if you combine all the revenue from different regions, Honkai Star is still it still comes out at a very respectable number 3 with 39.3 million. Genshin Impact, a very respectable number 5, 37.3 to 38.3 million. Zenless Zone Zero at number 6, 99.8 million, dropping down to 31.5 million. And then you have to go all the way down again to find Wuthering Waves at, I think it's like number 23, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's at number 14. At rank number 14, you've got 29.5 million going down to 13.5 million. So more than 50% of its revenue from the previous month just gone. So why is this? Okay, let's start with Honkai Star. Obviously, 39.3 million. I think this actually makes sense because Honkai Star is sorry. Honkai Star is actually the only game out of the 3 top HoYoverse games that got most of the time span of its previous 2 banners directly on top of the month of August, right? So both Jiaoqiu and Yingli's banners were mostly within that August month time zone. So most of its revenue got accounted for. 39.3 million makes sense. It made the most out of all the different HoYoverse games because it had the most banners within the month of August. That's really just how it is. Genshin Impact is a bit harder to explain, but this is when the gacha revenue chart gets really interesting and why I made this video in the first place. So Genshin Impact last month only made 37.3 million, and then this month, for the majority of this month, the banner that was most relevant was Emily. People don't give a shit about Emily. Let's be honest. I don't know when Emily came out, but that was a character that was being promoted in the patch before the Natlan release, and nobody really cared about it. So Natlan only released 3 to 4 days ago, and it's only got like 3 to 4 days to make that money, which is one of the excuses that you can give for why Genshin Impact is not making as much as it should. But I think for a new Genshin Impact region release, 38.3 million is definitely not as much as the previous regions. And there is also another reason for this, other than the small amount of time that Natlan has spent released, which is that Mualani is just not really that hype of a character. She is not very good in the meta. She's mostly just a mid Hydro DPS unit. There have already been a lot of Hydro DPS units. Novelet is absolutely better than her in terms of the meta. Even Ayato, I think, is a competitive with Mualani. I think even if you just use Yelan, if you have enough constellations, even at like C0, even like C0, C1, C2, even just by herself, she is probably a better DPS unit than Mualani. And then with enough constellations, Farina, Kakome, they can all be DPS units. So Mualani, from a meta standpoint, is just completely redundant. She doesn't really have a place in the meta outside of just being another version of a Hydro DPS that we have already had multiple times already. Even in terms of world traversal, I don't really think she is that great because Farina can already walk on water. I have her at C3. Yelan can zoom around on land. I have her at C0, but I have her signature weapon, so she's just like the overlap is too much. There's not a lot of reason for people to spend on Mualani in terms of both gameplay in the open world or in the meta. And even when you consider her non-gameplay related reasons, like, oh, is she cool? Does she have a good personality? Do people like her? From what I've seen in the Chinese survey, she is in the bottom 2 the least hyped Natlan characters. So people are definitely saving for future characters. However, with those excuses and reasons out of the way, depending on, whether or not you like or dislike Genshin Impact, you can just choose whether they are reasons or excuses. I still think that Genshin Impact's launch for Natlan is still probably no, it's not probably, it's the lowest earning Natlan, is absolutely the lowest region or lowest earning region that Genshin Impact has ever put out. I don't know why that was so hard to get out. But what's interesting, okay, here is the interesting part. Genshin Impact for Natlan is actually not significantly lower in terms of interest compared to the previous regions. If you look at the amount of interest that Natlan is garnering, this is a 68, right? It's still pretty early on in the time span that is counting. A 68, and then it's going down to 65 now. It's gonna keep going down over the span of this time because it's still September. This time span is counting September 1st to September 7th. So we've still got a bit of a week left. But it's not significantly different from all the other regions. Fontaine was a 66, Sumeru was a 68, Inazuma was a 67. So this is well within the same range of interest that the previous regions have ever gotten. Genshin Impact has always been a very consistent game in terms of how much its player base cares about the game, and I definitely think that the boost that Natlan got from all the different quality of life changes that it has given, that they have announced during the live stream, is definitely warranted that it is now this is getting this much attention. I am actually having the most amount of fun that I've ever had. Well, actually, not ever had, but this is the most amount of fun that I ever had in Genshin Impact within the last 2 years. It has not been since Sumeru that I've had this much fun in Genshin. I'm actively playing the game now again, and it just feels fun again. It feels fresh. I feel like Natlan has definitely refreshed my experience. I think it feels more like a venture compared to the previous region. I don't know why. Maybe it's the Pokemon stuff that is going on. Who knows? But for whatever reason, I'm actually having a lot of fun in Genshin Impact. So why are people not spending money in Genshin Impact, including myself? Well, there's just no reason to, and it's just not Mulan, but it's because of how old the game is. I have entered a state of being on autopilot when it comes to Genshin Impact. I can clear any of the abyss cycles. I've been able to clear the abyss cycle non-stop straight for more than 3 years. Not 3 years. I think I only started clearing Spiral Abyss at like mid Inazuma patches. So more than 2 years. And the recent Abyss, from what I have read, is actually the Abyss with the highest DPS check. It has the highest HP pool for the enemies out of any of the Abyss cycles. It has a pretty significant element check as well. There are Geo Shields, there are Hydro DP, there are Hydro enemies that you can use Hydro enemies on. So you need to put out a lot of DPS to clear the content. However, I am able to do that now. I have a C3 for any enemy that is not Hydro immune. I can just basically like 1-2 push my buttons and then they're dead. It is at the point now where I am continuing to play Genshin Impact without spending any money on it, and this will be important later on. So let's just keep moving on to Zenless Zone Zero. Zenless Zone Zero is the HoYoverse game that experienced the biggest drop. I still think that no matter what excuses or reasons you give, its China performance is definitely not doing very well. A drop of nearly 80% is very bad, but there is also another reason for why this is, and I'll keep going back to that later on. But for now, you just need to know that my impression of how Zenless Zone Zero doing in China is just it's not doing the greatest. And there is a reason for this. Qingyi is the only banner that came out in August, so that's only one banner. With the release of future characters like Jane Doe, Caesar King, and Bernice, all of which seem to be much more hyped than Qingyi, from like a Kumar standpoint, from like a, people just want big titty mamas, right? So the future characters seem to be much more exciting for the fan base, and I expect from the fact that there's going to be 2 banner characters in the next month, it is definitely going to earn more money next month, but they are definitely going to have to do more stuff to keep people interested in the game, in my opinion. And that has already been acknowledged by them at the end of the previous live stream. They basically gave a letter to the fan base saying, okay, we know that we have complaints, this is our first game, blah blah blah, keep playing our game because we, the devs are listening, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. So they know that they are not performing as well as they should be, or at least there is the perception that they are not performing as well as they should be, and they want to reassure the player base. So I don't think that's just me making shit up. Okay, going further down to Wuthering Waves, you have to go down to 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14. So in number 14, in rank number 14, you have Wuthering Waves going down over 50% of its revenue from the previous month, from 29.5 million to 13.5 million. Most of this drop was in China. It went down from like 15 million to 5.5 million, which is insane. Again, there is a reason for this, a very, very obvious reason for this that a lot of people are not mentioning, aside from just gacha games, because people only play gacha games and they don't consider the fact that China is experiencing something that a lot of people who only play gacha games will not notice. But we'll talk about that later on. Wuthering Waves is in kind of a dead patch state. There's no hologram in the newest patch. There's no like new region release. There's only like a event, and from what I've seen, the event doesn't seem to be too interesting. Jojo is kind of a nothing character in terms of how much hype she's getting. There's a lot of mixed opinions. Me personally, I tried out the demo. She was really fun. I like how she can teleport to the birds that she sends out, or I don't even know if they're birds. They might be butterflies. Who knows? But Wuthering Waves is actually, in terms of the content it's putting out, it's not bad content. It's just that it's not a lot of content. People want more substantial content. People want holograms, more endgame modes, that kind of stuff. That seems to be the kind of player base that Wuthering Waves has cultivated in terms of the most vocal minority. Even if, like, I think there is validity to the idea that Wuthering Waves' majority of the player base is still casual, but basically the people who actually talk about Wuthering Waves are the most hardcore players, and the people who actually do the holograms, those are the kind of players that are the most likely to talk about Wuthering Waves. So that might skew things towards, their side of things. They're not really talking about Wuthering Waves at this point. A lot of them are gone on to play other games like Black Myth Wukong, or even Zenless Zone Zero. So Wuthering Waves, the fact that we only had one character that was not very hyped, and even in the previous banner, like Chun-Li didn't do that well, as well as people expected her to. The fact that we only got Zhe, and then we're going to get another free-to-play character, free-to-play 5-star in the next half of the cycle, half of the banner, means that nobody is really spending money on Wuthering Waves because there's no reason to. There's no new content to destroy. There's nothing. So Wuthering Waves doing this amount of revenue is both not unexpected, is both expected, but also not really looking too good for the game because there's always the fear that, yeah, it's bad now, but is it going to be continue to do these numbers? Because to be frank, I've seen Storekeeper. She's hot. I think she's one of the best designs so far. Some people have called her just light mode Black Swan. I think light mode Black Swan is actually a very compelling design. However, I have also seen the animations, and to be frank, I'm not that impressed. I feel like Chun-Li and Jingxi, both Power Creeper, are both higher tier in terms of their animations. So we'll see what happens. And the other half of the banner, I think, is like a 5-star lolly character, a small character. So I don't know. Are people really interested in that? I don't know. So those are the excuses. There's also the fact that mobile Wuthering Waves, I forgot. Mobile Wuthering Waves is just not that fun to play because initially there were a lot of optimization issues. There's the idea that most of the people who play this game play on PC. Some people call that copium. Me personally, I think there is validity to that idea. I don't think it's complete copium. I personally cannot imagine playing this game on mobile, even if it was like running perfectly, because like some of the enemies move so fast. You either have to have multiple copies of the character to make them so overpowered that you don't have to bother with dodging, or like you just hit them in 3 hits and they die, or you need to like move around your camera so fast, especially with some of the borked camera. The focus camera, the camera lock on is just not that great. So sometimes you just have to manually unlock your camera and then actually look at the enemy if they just go off screen and you have to track them. You can't really do that on mobile, or at least not very well. And then you have to press all these buttons at the same time. It's just, I don't know. Playing this game on mobile just seems like a nightmare. So maybe this is not indicative of what's happening on PC, but at the same time, that's not really the point because this is the only info that we can actually see. Anyways, so that is the state of the big gacha games that we mostly talk about within our circles, right? The big gacha community circle, the people who talk about the Genshin likes, the Honkai Staros, the Zenless Zone Zeros, the Wuthering Waves, the Tower of Fantasies, and in the future, Azopomelia, there's going to be NTE, Neverness to Everness. But here is the gist of what I want to get at with this video. These games are all within the same circle. These games all fit within the same category, not just HoYoverse games. There has been this idea that HoYoverse games butcher their own revenue, but I would like to make the argument that it's not just HoYoverse games, but big budget gacha game titles in general. Zenless Zone Zero is probably the most different big budget gacha game that has come out since Genshin, compared to even Tower Fantasy, which was an MMO. When you play MMO from a moment to moment basis, it actually feels still significantly more like Genshin Impact than Zenless Zone Zero, in my opinion. Wuthering Waves as well, even though it has more hardcore endgame content, even though it has the holograms, the moment to moment gameplay, from the open world traversal to the events to the storytelling, still feels very Genshin-like. Even Honkai Star, which is a turn-based game that eventually becomes an idle game if you play it long enough and you get more powerful, even the storytelling and the world traversal, and even just like the world building itself still feels very, very similar to Genshin. And of course, there's the gacha system. Zenless Zone Zero is, in my opinion, the most different compared to Genshin. But even then, you can still compare them all within the same circle, if only just because they're HoYoverse games and because the gacha system is very similar. And of course, there's still action combat RPG games. So they can all be compared to each other. And I think there is validity to the idea that all of these games share the same, not just HoYoverse, not just the HoYoverse community, but these games all share the same community. It's not rare for you to see a person going from Wuthering Waves to Zenless Zone Zero. So I don't know why we say that it's only HoYoverse games that are getting butchered. It's also Wuthering Waves because all of these games share the same community. Now, does that mean that there are no differences between the communities? No. Zenless Zone Zero have, when you look at the like nitty gritty of the game's gameplay, there are obviously very significant differences even between games like Zenless and Wuthering Waves. But the communities that play these games do have significant overlap. So, what does this mean for the future of gacha games, and why am I making this video? Well, I don't think that future gacha games are going to be anything significant. I think with Zenless Zone Zero, this will be the last of the major gacha games that will come out that will be relevant to our circle, to the people who care about the Genshin-like games, essentially, the big budget gacha games. Why is that? Because we are experiencing a boom and bust cycle with gacha games. The boom started with Genshin Impact, it boomed again with Honkai Star Rail, and then it boomed again with Wuthering Waves. But I think that with Wuthering Waves, with 3 gacha games on the market, and with Zenless Zone Zero, a 4th gacha game on the market, I think Zenless Zone Zero actually fit in right at the tail end of the boom cycle, and now we are entering a bust cycle where there are so many gacha games that are of high quality standards that all have very similar, like if not gameplay, but like the gacha progression, that you can realistically not play more than 2 or 3 of these games at the same time. So if there is a 4th or 5th gacha game that comes out, you are going to have to split your time or give up your time with one gacha game. For me, that is Wuthering Waves. I'm no longer actively playing that game because I'm still playing Genshin Impact, and the gameplay is just too similar for me to justify playing another game. Wuthering Waves, despite all the differences in the combat, I have done all of the 1.0 holograms to the maximum difficulty to completion, but I just can't stand the open world traversal. Um, I don't like going around collecting chests all that much anymore. Genshin Impact is basically the maximum amount of open world traversal that I'm willing to do. Even in Black Myth Wukong, which is going to be important here. Black Myth Wukong, even just traversing around Black Myth Wukong sometimes feel too tedious for me, and I wish that I could get to the bosses sooner. I've been playing that game a lot in the past week or two. So that is basically where my stance is for these big budget gacha games. I don't feel excited for future gacha games, if I'm being perfectly honest. I don't really feel that excited for Azure Pomelia or Arknight's Enfield or Neverness to Everness. Sure, they might have cars or an urban environment or Pokemon mechanics, but I assure you that the basic gameplay structure of going around the open world and collecting chests is still going to be exactly the same. The gacha game progression system is probably going to be exactly the same, and it's just not interesting anymore. Does that mean that I don't like gacha games at all at this point? Absolutely not. Like I said, I am having the time of my life with Genshin Impact. I have not had this much fun since Sumeru. And judging by the amount of like popularity and interest that Genshin Impact is getting right now with Natlan, it's not significantly less than all the previous regions. People are still interested in this game, which is exactly the problem for future gacha games. Because even if people are not spending money in Genshin Impact, that doesn't mean that they have stopped playing Genshin Impact. Just because I am no longer spending money in Genshin. Not on my main account, not on my free to play account. I just don't spend money on Genshin Impact, period. That's why this number is so low, $38.3 million. There is no reason for me to spend money despite my continued playtime with this game. And because I am continuing playing Genshin Impact, it means that I am not spending more time with Wuthering Waves or with Azure Promelia. I am not incentivized in any way to play these new games because I know that they're going to be relatively similar, that they're going to offer me relatively the same experience that I'm already getting in Genshin Impact. Just because I'm spending less money here doesn't mean I'm going to spend more money elsewhere. Even with Honkai Star Rail, I feel like I'm also entering the state of autopilot that I am now in for Genshin Impact. I think the endgame combat in Honkai Star Rail is so robust, if you want to call it that, that I am not as incentivized to keep up with it anymore compared to Genshin Impact, which is much easier to keep up with because there is no new endgame. Well, actually there is now, but even then, with the amount of characters I have, with the amount of investment I have over the 4 years, that is still incredibly easy for me. Maybe with the additional difficulty now with the new Imaginarium Theater, it'll be something that I can get more into. But then again, that's just more time spent in Genshin Impact and less time spent in other games. So I think we have reached the maximum or near the maximum amount of attention that this player base can give to the kind of games that they like. The amount of people who are interested in these gacha games is not increasing exponentially. It's not like we're getting, maybe there are going to be more fans of like anime style games in the future, but it's not like the world population is increasing in the regions where these games are most popular. Again, it's in China, it's in Japan. These places are actually losing people, and it's not like the West is also gaining a lot of, a lot of people either. The birth rates are like down through the floor. So the player base is not increasing. Maybe the amount of spending will be, but even then it's very iffy. So are we seeing the end of what we've known to be the gacha game industry as far as everything that has existed since Genshin Impact? I think we are. I think we are seeing the last gacha game. Zenless Zone Zero to me is the last gacha game that I am interested in. I don't want to play any of these like future gachas that have the same progression system, that have an open world. Maybe, and I think that HoYoverse knows this. HoYoverse absolutely knows this. Have you noticed that there have been no announcements as to like their future gacha games, at least according to like at least that is relevant to our circle? No, it's not a coincidence. I don't think that this is definitely on purpose. HoYoverse's next game, Asta Weave Haven, it has already been approved. It is being approved for release, but this is not an action adventure game. This is not a Zenless or Honkai Star or a Genshin. This is actually an Animal Crossing like game. I don't think this game is going to be as discussed or be like within the same circles that we are, circle of games that we are currently discussing. I don't think that the content creators, maybe they will like check it out, but I don't think they will give it the same amount of time as even Zenless Zone Zero, because it's just not the same type of game. HoYoverse is actively moving away from this genre of games that they have built for themselves. Yes, it might still be anime-esque. Maybe it still has the same art style, but it's not going to have this nearly the same amount of gameplay. And here is something else that a lot of people who only play gacha games might not have noticed. China is actually starting to release AAA titles that are not gacha games. I know that a lot of people like to say that gacha games aren't AAA titles, but in terms of the amount of money they put into the games, the amount of effort they put into the patches, I absolutely think that a lot of the gacha games that are being put out now are straight up AAA titles. But now they have begun to make actual like single player RPG AAA titles. And Black Myth Wukong has been such a success in China that I think it is very reasonable to think that possibly the decline in revenue, it's not just HoYoverse games that have declined in revenue. It's actually the total amount of revenue for gacha games in general has actually a decline in the month of August, 0.72%. It's not a lot, but I think it makes sense that specifically China, the China region, is experiencing the greatest decline in gacha revenue in both Zenless Zone Zero and Wuthering Waves. It's not just because of those games' contents, in my opinion. It's actually because most of those people have already actually spent their money on Black Myth Wukong. This game is so popular in China that it is actually making PS5 systems sell out in that region. And not only just that, I think the release of Black Myth Wukong, which I've been playing nonstop for like the past week or so, and that was what caused me to miss the Sumo Lanka event or the vast majority of it. I think this will push Chinese developers to head down a route that is not necessarily just solely gacha related anymore. I think they are going to release or at least copy what Black Myth Wukong has done and be incentivized to release more single player RPG titles, perhaps also about Chinese myths. Who knows? But my hope and my belief is that like Chinese games will not just stick to gacha games. This is not they're going to be their only thing for the foreseeable future. Maybe even HoYoverse in the future will start to release single player RPGs. I would very much look forward to a single player version of Honkai Impact Third, because that game, the amount of like stuff that you have to catch up on in that game is insane. And also, it's just not really that fun to play anymore because the vast majority of the game is outdated. And with the exception of part two, which some people would still consider to be outdated, it's just not like none of the characters you pull for are going to be very useful. Most of the Valkyrie suits have been power crept to dust. It's just not an enjoyable experience. So the fact that Black Myth Wukong has been so successful in China is, in my opinion, a very positive thing. And I think that is partially why a lot of the China regions are actually earning less than the global regions. Like Honkai Star and Global actually earned more than China. Genshin Impact did not, but Zenless Zone Zero actually went down in terms of percentage more than global Zenless Zone Zero. And this was the same with Wuthering Waves as well, with global Wuthering Waves earning 3 million more, 2.5 million more than Chinese Wuthering Waves. So that is my thought on how the gacha game industry is developing. I don't think that we're going to be experiencing the same, oh my god, it's so hype, another Genshin-like game, another, I know you don't like to call it Genshin-likes, let's be honest. That's probably an insulting game for, especially for the Wuthering Waves fans. I don't mean it to be insulting. I actually think that the Genshin template, the Genshin formula is a very compelling one. And it makes a lot of sense that Wuthering Waves covered it. But I think we have reached the point of saturation that is no longer going to be as viable as it once was. People are also just not as interested in Genshin Impact anymore, even though it's not appreciably so. The fact that even the people who are still interested in Genshin, right? They're not going to, are they really going to just quit Genshin? I don't think it really makes, I don't think that is borne out by the amount of interest that Natlan has garnered. You can just offer more rewards, as we have seen from the live stream in Natlan. They can just offer more rewards and people will just head back and play that game. It's not really that complicated. People have already inbuilt relationship with Genshin. They don't really need another Genshin-like game, is what I have noticed. So this is Bench Gamer signing out. I hope you guys have found that found this maybe not informative, but at least entertaining. Bench Gamer signing out. I'll see you guys later. Bye.